Craft Fireside Chat here, building trust in a zero trust world. For those of you who have attended Craft Fireside Chats in the past, we try to come up with different ideas that we've gotten questions from founders or executives time and time again. And then we go into our own, community, and we find experts or people who might be able to help, have a conversation around this. So today is, we're going to be, led by Bil Harmer. He's our operating partner of security here. And then also Christina at Vanta and Diane at SourceGraph. But Bil, I will let you kick us off and give a little bit of a background about you.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It's great to be hosting a fireside chat with everybody on the subject of security and building trust in the zero trust world. As mentioned, my name is Bil Harmer. I'm an operating partner here at Craft, handling security, basically providing vCISO services to the portfolio companies. My background is in security, privacy, compliance, and operations. I'm the former CIO and CISO for SecureAuth, the former America CISO for Zscaler, and I was the head of security and the global privacy officer for the cloud division of SAP. And let me tee this up before we introduce our guests, because I want to give you guys some context as to why we are here and why we have these two people here to speak to us. If you think back to 2009, John Kindervog founded the concept of zero trust, centered on the belief that trust is a vulnerability and security had to be designed with the strategy of never trust, always verify. By about 2018, NISTA brought out SB 800-207, which was the zero trust architecture, focusing on the core principles. And virtually every security approach today, based on marketing or actual implementation, is really honed in on zero trust. So if you add to that all the data privacy things that were coming out of Europe, led with the move from the EU Privacy Directive to full-blown laws, and then into the US with California, Connecticut, Virginia, Colorado, and Utah that now have privacy laws in place. If you contrast this tightening of security and privacy belt with the growth of public cloud usage and the revenues being generated there, which if you combine SaaS, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service, by 2023, the end of this year, we're expecting over $500 billion in revenue. It raised a really interesting question. How do you never trust and always verify what's happening with your data through a third-party provider? So in sort of scoping that question out, we have two guests with us today. We have Christina Cacioppo, who is the CEO and founder of Vanta, and Diane Garcia, who is the head of operations for Scratchpad. Christina, I'll turn it over to you for a quick introduction, a little background, if you would.
For sure. Thanks so much, Bill. So as you mentioned, Christina Cacioppo, co-founder and CEO of Vanta. I've been working on Vanta for the past 5 years or so. We automate security and compliance for quickly growing companies. So this is kind of right in our wheelhouse. And the origin story of the company kind of dates to something Bill was talking about, was looking at some of these processes as a kind of PM and engineer and saying like, hey, it's really important. We are trustworthy and secure, but the way we go about doing that is what now, right? Is screenshots and annual audits and PDFs and what? Anyway, prior to Vanta, just briefly, I was a PM at Dropbox, working on what at the time was a new product, Dropbox Paper, sort of their Google Docs equivalent. And I was really fortunate to start my career at an early stage VC firm in New York. So mostly got to meet a lot of founders, and it helped kind of humanize the role for me.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Diane, yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Diane. I am the director of operations at Scratchpad. I was hired here as one of the first employees that wasn't on the founding team. And honestly, I started, and the first thing they were like, here, you're going to manage security for the company. It wasn't even on the job description. So I've got like 2.5 years of really digging in and learning all about security. Before this, my background is really at startups. I completely out of like left field, I've built and managed customer success teams. So really shifted from helping to make sure that our customers are served and supported into helping to make sure that the entire company is supported. And security is such a huge part. Like, I'm really glad that I've gotten the opportunity to learn how it impacts the business, because it's not just an engineering thing by any means.
But you just proved that security is everybody's job. And I think that's fantastic. So let's talk about that. Security and trust, very, very loaded terms in today's market. Everybody seems to have their own definition of them. Christina, we'll start with you. How do you think about security and trust at Vanta?
For us, yeah. So I think we think about it as core of what we do at Vanta. And I mean, it's like kind of a deeply held principle. And it's a deeply held principle because if we are not trustworthy, like as Vanta, at Vanta, our mission and vision of helping other companies prove their trust is honestly sort of just out the window, right? Like this is almost beyond table stakes. And so, there's various investments we made in both team and processes and tooling. I can talk through a bunch of like, this is everybody's responsibility. And kind of to that point, when new folks join Vanta, Vantans, on their first day, I do a half hour with them and I talk through the mission, I talk the principles, and then I talk about this piece, right? Literally. And so it is just part of every new Vantan's first 4 hours, call it, at Vanta with me. And it's trying to kind of tone set and to your point, make this about everyone.
I think that, driving it from the top down is so critically important, and they must know that your time is important. So for you to take the time out to talk about that should really, really drive it home. Diane, on Scratchpad, being a consumption operation as opposed to a validator in the case of Vanta, how are you guys seeing security and trust inside?
Yeah, so Scratchpad, our customers were really serve sales teams. So for us, it's interesting in that we really got into security because it was basically table stakes for us to talk to our customers and get deals. So we actually partnered with Vanta since the beginning, I think before we were officially like our own independent entity. And from there, every single, like Christina, every single employee goes through a security onboarding. Every single year they go through onboarding. We talk about it, we have a channel. So it's something for us that is from our engineering standpoint, it's just core to how we operate. We think about when we're building product, we have security built in because we have those checks and balances, know what's in front of us. And then from the sales side, it's just something that's become so crucial to how we operate. Like it's really something that's helping us drive revenue. So from the other side, that's also important. So we have secure product and we have secure sales.
Well, if we could, let's dig into that, because you said some things that really, you guys are making me feel so happy that we're starting to get somewhere in this world on this subject. Because when you sell to sales don't tend to really care about security much. They just close the deal. How are you building that internal trust with the teams so that you can shorten that sales cycle as an operator? Well,
I mean, for me, honestly, having Vanta is nice. Coming in, Vanta gives you like this checklist of everything you need to do to be like SOC 2. We leverage SOC 2 and GDPR modules. So I've got a checklist, I've got everything. And then I've got an output from Vanta that says, hey, look at all this great stuff they're doing. So from there, what we have is we're able to go to somebody like his chief security officer. I recently had to go through SAP security review. But we have everything. We've got all of these checks and balances. So it's not just me scrambling to answer 500 questions in the specific way that a company did this. We've got, hey, here's everything you need. Here's our SOC 2, here's clean. And instead of having, 20 conversations with the security team, we're saying, here's an overview, review it. We've got the answers teed up. And it's just, instead of 20, it's like 2 to 3. And that's even with like bigger enterprise companies, just because we've got everything so buttoned up, because our security has been top notch since basically the company was founded.
I do apologize because you probably had some of my input into that question. That's fantastic. So Christina, coming back to you then, because you're a startup founder here, and what advice do you have for the startups, like Scratchpad and the others that are here, as they're building it at those early stages? How do they start thinking about their approach to compliance and security?
Yeah, so kind of twofold on the compliance side, truly, and speaking of sales teams, my sales team would probably kill me if they heard me say this, but fortunately, just for craft founders, on the compliance side, like no one does SOC 2 for fun, and like, yes, Vanta's great and we like it, whatever, but like no one does this for fun. And so you don't do it for fun. Like do it when you have customers that are, in your pipeline that are blocked on this, right? But don't do it before then. And again, this is where I don't think the sales team would love it, because they try to, pull deals forward and do all the best practices. But I think as a startup founder, right, these things have gotten less expensive, both in terms of dollars and company time over the past couple of years, but it's non-zero on both fronts, right? And you probably have a product development roadmap full of other features customers want. And so in some ways, I would think about these compliance certifications as a feature a customer wants, and you should trade that compliance feature, just, not quite a feature, but, this whole process, but trade that off against all the other things you want to build for customers and figure out that. That's on the compliance side. On the security side, my answer here is a little different. There is just some amount of kind of low-hanging best practice-y fruit that is easiest to do in the beginning, basically because you make things normal and norms within your company. And then as you add people, you're just, doing the stuff you do and no one thinks twice about it, versus trying to bolt on some of this later. So my favorite example that is like super, super minor, but actually really impactful, is turning two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication on for everything, but particularly for the email and Slack. And again, from your founder perspective, this is a switch in an admin panel. If it isn't on, there's like, you have to go, get everybody to go set up their phones or do whatever it is. But and that's a bit of a pain. But if you just think about doing that at 10 people versus 100, right? It is like, do it at 10. And anyway, so there's a set of things like that. There's lots of lists online. I think we have some on our website, but broadly, it's sort of like 2FA, all the things that you can truly. Figure out some lightweight way, if you can, for like when people start using new software. So you just figure out like, what is all the SaaS my company uses? You're never going to get it right, but if you just start to train people to be like, stick it in a spreadsheet over here, you have something to start with, versus, again, imagine having 100 people and they've all like gone off and gotten their own tools to get their job done, and that's great, but you have like no idea where your customer data is.
Oh yeah, there's a solid reason that SaaS tools are priced at $19.95 a month or $24.95, because that slips under the receipt requirement radar, and that's the best place to look for them.
So if you can just kind of do stuff like that. The other one, actually, on the engineering side, is to the extent you can make code reviews common. There's lots of reasons to do code reviews. I think there's a sort of an interesting study from Microsoft. One of the primary ones is actually just getting more folks up to speed on different parts of the code base, which is like wonderful for engineering productivity. Outside of that, a lot of these compliance standards and honestly like vendor review processes will just require it anyway. And again, this is one of the things where if you do it at 6 engineers, everyone's like, oh, well, I guess we have to run Robin, grumble, but they do it. Versus especially prior to my time at Dropbox, but Dropbox didn't institute mandatory code reviews until there were a couple hundred engineers, and it took them a year to switch over. And it was just like a year that, they could have spent on other things. And so when you think about some of these processes, there is a bit where it's just like, again, little painful at 6, but way better than at 60 or 160 people.
So building the muscle memory early, building the acceptance and the understanding early helps grow it, because you'll also socially grow it, right? The person beside you'll say, yeah, we got to do this. We do it every year. It stops us having to get audited by FAB.
Right. Like the next 10 people who join, engineers, and you tell them you do code reviews, and they're like, oh, cool. I guess I work at a company that has code reviews. I'll do that too. Right. And there's just like no pushback. No, it just becomes normal. Yeah,
absolutely. Dan, how about yourself? Have you seen anything in that sort of push from the outside that drives, as Christine was saying, don't do a SOC 2 until you need to? And I'm one of these CISOs that will tell you don't implement security until you got a product. And really, if you hit 2FA, you've got 90% of the attack problems out there covered. Now refocus yourself. What are you seeing inside Scratchpad?
Yeah, I feel like before the decision was made before me, like literally, like when we were 4 people, I think we had Vanta. And it was great because it had that blueprint. So everything Christina said about just like building it into the flow, we do that. So that's what I liked, is it was kind of like, hey, engineering team, here's a checklist of everything you need to do just as you build. What I will say has been interesting is that drive. For example, we recently have a customer and we turned it down because they wanted us to be HIPAA compliant. Our target customer profile right now is not in the healthcare industry. HIPAA compliance is a whole nother beast. I am solid with SOC 2 and GDPR, I'm like, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work. Like from an infrastructure, like I cannot take my product and engineering team off of core functionality for this one customer, even if it's a great customer. So that's where we've got that earmark, we've got some business value, but really if more customers in that space start knocking at our door, then it's something to consider. But really right now it's like, I can't make that trade-off. And that's kind of been one of the biggest things that I think has been an interesting learning experience, is being like, wow, we do have to make that trade-off. And then the other side is just that complexity. The difference between a security review from a startup and an SAP is a lot. So as we're getting questions and they're more intricate, we're doing most of what they're asking for. We've just never been asked. So we've got this like running library of, okay, these are the types of questions, you know, that these enterprise companies are asking us. And we're building a playbook around that and empowering our sales team. Again, so it's more about, okay, we're getting a little bigger, we're going upstream, and really kind of using that as a checkpoint for, okay, what do we need to do next? What are the decisions? How does this measure against our like product and feature work?
Yeah, that's the ability to say no is incredible, and having the courage to say no, because with a lot of startups, people are like, no, got to have every sale. But being able to step back and understand the risk, because HIPAA will open up a world of issues, compliance problems, added costs, overhead, that you may or may not want to get into. And if you as a business haven't decided it, that is your vertical, then it's absolutely a great area to stay away from, because it gets sticky and messy really, really quickly. I remember years ago, I had a potential customer coming, and it was a small customer, and it was not a lot of money, but they were the customer. They would have been the customer that held the effective HR information for the volunteers that did nuclear and de-weapons checking for countries that had violated. And it's like, these are targets. They want their address. They want to know who these people are that are going to come in and vet, you know, did you remove the nuclear material from your enrichment plant? And we're like, no, keep them away. We're walking away from that. That isn't even a compliance issue, but it puts a target on your back that you don't want to be the collateral damage of. So I think that's fantastic. I guess, you know, Christina, back to you on the automated compliance side, and you've grown really quickly into this what I would call trust management platform. You know, you're serving bigger customers, and I think as you're building and scaling from that perspective, how are you also building trust with your customers and demonstrating that security posture? Because, you know, essentially who's watching the watchman is really what's going to happen, because a lot of stuff, and I've heard this in other forums that I'm a part of, where they say, you know, ask how they store the data. Is it commingled? Is it separated? You know, those kinds of things. How do you do that at scale?
Yeah. So what we started doing, actually twofold. I mean, to the kind of building trust internally and operationally, we sort of treated a lot of the security management like the rest of engineering, as in, if we, you know, organize management more generally, right, is if you like set metrics, monitor them, you know, maybe their metrics you're trying to maximize, maybe they're guardrails, but then just look at that and make sure people are focused on it. And so that's sort of what we did with our internal security program, which was helpful to us to have our own, you know, kind of confidence in what we were doing, but it doesn't sort of address the other part of the question where, you know, customers asking you things, and, you know, if you go in more confident in the conversation, great, but like, well, you know, what are they supposed to ascertain from that? And so honestly, what we did was, well, we had these kind of dashboards that showed what we were doing to ourselves and our metrics and how well we were doing. We would just screen share those. And some of those were built into the Vanta product, the customer facing UI, some weren't. Some were in a tool like Datadog, we just started screen sharing those. And I think there's actually a lot of power in that, because it was like, no, this is the internal dashboard. Like, this is what we do. And I think it showed two things. One, it was the actual, like what the metrics were and, you know, dashboard, the way it looked. Some of it was just that we had this, right? And it was like, oh, you are mature enough as an organization to like think about this and have a way you're doing it internally. And so maybe if you're not tracking everything I want you to, I actually believe you'll kind of get there, right? And I'll kind of bet on the slope and the trajectory here. Anyway, so we're doing that for a bit, and then we just kind of productize that, right? And so now there is a part of Vanta that we use at Vanta, like Vanta on Vanta, that is sort of this internal dashboard made public. And so made public means there's some access controls, you make sure that people see it, more kind of customer and prospect facing, but it's the same plot, right? It is like just real-time visibility into what's actually happening. And it's kind of underlying a lot of the sunlight disinfects all mold sort of, theory of things, right? Like the transparency both will get to better operational outcomes. And there's just a lot of trust in being like, here's where we are, right? And like, here's what's going well, and here are the things we're working on. But here's what this thing looked like 3 months ago. So you can see the progress we've made, and sort of implicitly, like, don't you want to bet on this slope? Like, don't you want to bet on this trajectory here? And I've actually just found that to work quite well. Yeah. And again, I think some of it's the actual artifacts, and some of it's just the SAPs of the world aren't used to conversations like that.
No, yeah.
Bill, if I may, sorry
yeah,
to
please.
interrupt. We did get a question from Roland, and since it's a small group, I figured let's answer questions as we go, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So this one is, what are some ways or best practices that you have seen for maintaining documentation? Not just policy docs, but I often get security questionnaires that have questions related to our products, as well as our legal, HR, IT, finance, other policies. So I find there are pockets of documentation that need to be referenced across the company. Now, before we answer that, I also have to put a plug into another portfolio company here at Craft, TrustLayer. So if you haven't looked at TrustLayer, they're a great partner and person that can help you with that. But then I will let you all answer it.
I will open it up to the floor here. Diane, Christina, one of you want to take a run at that one?
Yeah, I'll start. So this is a lot of what I manage. So we're a startup, right? So we don't know what's going to get thrown at us. Like I was saying, SAP asked questions that we had never been asked before. So we kind of have a couple of channels. So we do work with a virtual security officer as well. So I've got someone similar to Bill that has been there, does that, like done that, knows what's going on and has credibility with customers. He's there as a resource. So we've got a channel for our sales team called security and compliance. If they have a question from a customer, they can throw it in there and get a response. And then we're leveraging Guru and Notion. So basically it's just a running list of, hey, what questions do I have? What answers? And it lives as a resource within our security page. So we've got basically a list of like security resources in Notion, and we just continually add questions and positioning that the sales team has been curious about and make it easy for them to access and just ask. And for me, it's all about making it public. So if somebody asks me a question, I'm like, go post it in that channel. Everyone needs to see the answer. And it's really like a living and breathing document for us.
That's great. Great. Christina, yourself?
Yeah, I feel like this is more, honestly, my old Dropbox paper world in some ways, right? Like, and this is why these human collaboration tools can just be so hard. Because I think there's certainly software development pieces of it, but it's very much a human and like an operational, organizational question, right? And so sort of building off of what Diane said, I think you just want to, as much as possible, centralize this information and direct people in your company to one place. So you don't get, your legal documents live in Google Drive, but your engineering documentation is over in Notion or, whatever, insert 7 more tools here. I think it's really that piece, because then once it's there, you actually get a much fuller idea, and a bunch of it's duplicative and you can slim it down and simplify. But first step is kind of figuring out what the heck's going on, and then getting people to put the documents in the same place, whatever that is. We have this capability in Vanta, but like really just whatever tool you actually use is the best. And then I think once you have it there, and I mentioned this, but I think there's often a lot of opportunities to simplify this, like, kind of coming at security and compliance with fresh eyes a couple years ago. One of the things you realize is there's actually just some principles that underlie a lot of this. I think Rob's article, I put it in chat, actually does a good job of, talking through those principles. And then it's sort of training people in those, and then they can go apply, well, what does it mean to like inventory all the things in a legal context or in an HR context, right? But you want to kind of train people, okay, you should inventory, you should, these kind of big principles there. I think that's just easier to do once you, again, have the full scope of, or much of the scope of what documentation your company does have as well.
Yeah, I think if you even take that concept of inventory, because I've always said the underpinnings of the best security program is a complete inventory, and that's not just hardware or documents, it's data as well, it's people. Once you have a documentation of what your company is comprised of, what's the makeup of it, you can then start to step back and understand where your threats will come from, where your risks are, where you're going to spend money, where it doesn't make sense to spend money, where where you want to automate, where you can't afford to have human intervention or wait for that, or where you can go out of band and let something be sort of more of a reactionary documentation audit trail versus an actual defense mechanism that you put in place. That's a great question. Thank you, Roland. And if anybody else there has some questions, by all means, put them into the chat. We'll happily get them in here as we go. Diane, to you, I watched, I think it was Puyan's video on Scratchpad. As a security person, you'd rarely expect me to have ever been in Salesforce. But having been on the sales side of the house at Zscaler for 5 years, doing pre-sales and customer updates and managing customers, our top 100 there, I was in Salesforce a lot, and when he started showing how easily and quickly things worked, I was thinking, my God, why didn't somebody do this 6 years ago when I was in there digging through trying to do my weekly updates? But Salesforce is the lifeblood of every company, or the equivalent, whatever somebody's using. When it comes to companies, it's sales, right? If we don't have sales, we don't have a company. If we don't have a company, security really doesn't mean anything at that point. So with an application that allows you to tie into the lifeblood as closely as you do, and there are going to be downstream effects of manipulation of data and making sure that there's non-repudiation in the information that's then stored. I'm assuming Scratchpad has some automation, has productivity that's being brought into the security world. How do you balance it? How do you balance out the need for speed and automation versus costs and the size and scope of who you are as a company?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head why we just went straight and got help with security, because Salesforce data, everyone, like you said, it's the lifeblood of the company. What's really interesting for us is that because we know that, we've specifically architected the product so that we're not storing Salesforce data. This is actually a challenge we have in explaining to security contacts that, hey, we're not just downloading all of your Salesforce, and it's not like a back and forth sync or integration. It's via the API. So we're able to get around a lot of security questions because we actually aren't storing your Salesforce data. It's really about that manipulation layer. But that being said, as we're growing and getting more sophisticated customers, they want us to start doing things where it would require us to store data. And that's something that we're intentionally reviewing really as we're roadmapping the product, because for the product to get more sophisticated, we need to store that data. And luckily we have that solid SOC 2 foundation that's really guided us to make sure that our product is compliant and secure. But it's really okay, now we've got this layer of actually storing data. What does this mean? How do I scope it? So it's really nice because we have that background of we can actually understand what it is as the product develops. And honestly, we put off building some features because it's okay, we would have to rehaul our security infrastructure, or okay, we'll wait, we need to go ahead and really scope this and notify customers. So it's really a guiding, I wouldn't say a guide path for us, more so we can make decisions and just prioritize.
That's fantastic. And I assume, you have executive support across the board, given that you guys built SOC 2 in from day one, as opposed to the history, which is let's have engineering develop and build something and have security punch holes in it, and then have that argument as to why it may or may not be the right direction. So Christina, on that same automation side, as you develop the product, as you start to build out where you're going, I guess you're storing a lot of data. Is there recommendations or, sort of easy, nice to have, like to have things that you can advise on how do you manage that data?
Oof, yeah. Okay, a couple things. I'm just kind of trying to be like
Little question, big answer.
Yeah. One in particular is try to figure out where the customer data is, right? So databases, storage buckets, queues, that are other stuff, right? But like, where is it? And again, kind of in the inventory of all the things, like maintain that list. You can do it in a spreadsheet. You can kind of do it in tagging and like the AWS console, although honestly that kind of sucks. There's Vanta's capability, whatever. It's like spreadsheet works, like, but do that somewhere. And I think sort of the HIPAA conversation, to the extent you are storing generic customer data, call it, versus healthcare data versus PII, first names, last names, protected class information, salary information, right? Like kind of denote that. And again, just having that inventory is helpful, because I think once you have that, you can do things like, okay, who has access to, these things? Do they need this access, right? Like, how do we think about the employees who can see this and do things with it? You can think about, in security speak, controls, but just like different ways to safeguard this. And maybe you have, a database with really sensitive information, a database with, I don't know, people's favorite colors, right? And you can treat them differently. Sometimes that is helpful. Honestly, sometimes it's not, and it's just more overhead. And then it's just like, okay, well, pretend everything is PII and go forth, if that's just simpler. But I think that's really helpful. And then that's kind of more on the like sort of technical side. And then I think the other piece is on the customer success, customer support, customer experience side, who has access to what customer data? Do they need that access? I think every company sort of goes from, hey, we have this internal dashboard, you can like log into a customer account, and like everyone has access to that because there's 6 of us and we need to debug stuff. Right. And then as you grow, how do you think about changing that? Like many companies, we have our own at Vanta, our own like access system for customer data and seeing accounts. For historical reasons, it's actually called Red Panda. And so you Red Panda into someone's account, you become a Red Panda, and the Red Panda can see everything. So it's like very Vanta specific. But we've went from like, you can see and do everything, you were just impersonating a user with like full write access, to like, bad idea, right? Like you could just see things to, okay, now there's like different levels of like, a CS person is different than a support person, is different than sales, we sort of just lock them out, right? But kind of going through that maturity process. And I think that's helpful, but I think the other thing I'd say is you don't have to start with all that, right? You start with something that's kind of very coarse that you can upgrade over time as the business needs it. Because again, these are all like, they're great features, and in a vacuum, you totally want them for your internal systems, but more likely than not, you're trading off against stuff your customers want too, for them. And so trying to strike that right balance.
Yeah, no, like, I mean, you hit on 2 interesting things there that I've come across in my past as well. And one is that simple, taking the simple versus making the choice, right? So just everything's PII, right? If you just do everything's PII, you have one process, you follow one process, you always do one process. And if you can find ways to implement that without an egregious amount of extra cost, I think that's such a reasonable way of doing it. Because normally when mistakes are made, it's when we have our users make choice, right? And we saw this in the world of VPNs back in those days. It was, do I connect to the VPN to get to that app, or do I not connect to the VPN? And it just became a usability issue, which frustrates users. And when you have frustrated users, they find ways around the processes you put in. And then the impersonation one, I can see everything and act as, and I think that's a fantastic one to highlight early stage. Even if you need to have that ability, and you want it, being able to set yourself up to be able to turn your app to a point where your customer must enable it and you have an audit trail of that. If I could recommend a feature in any side of customer support, and Diane, jump in here if I'm wrong or not, but from the customer support, like you need to have the ability to see stuff. How does it look? Why is it acting this way? Did my app go sideways? What caused the error? Or how do I help my customer be successful in using the app? And sometimes that is that need to impersonate, but from the security perspective and the privacy side, if you have a little tick box that says it's enabled and it has an automatic turn off after 3 hours, and they have to manually go in there and make that 24 or make that whatever, and can never leave it as always, you slim down so much of that access requirements, which then lead to right to audit and all of the other costs that get piled onto the back. I think is a fantastic way to build in an interface into for the support side. Dan, have you guys done anything on that support side, or have you seen that in the past?
Yeah, I feel like that's like what Christina described as a journey. So we started, I'm like realizing we started so much more, I guess, compliant than I even realized. So we started and we had an impersonation tool and you could see, and that was the basic access that everyone had. And then we moved to, we need you to email or verbally confirm that it's okay for us to look. And then basically as we're moving into like, hey, we just need to scope out internal tooling for the team, that's where we're just folding this in as part of that internal tooling. And it's part of just honestly like our security roadmap, getting more like, okay, how do we put this in product instead of just getting that log of confirmation and that log that somebody actually impersonated into the account. So it's really complex. And then from other teams, yeah, I want to say, honestly, I've only ever seen that hourly in bigger companies where there's massive teams, because that is something that I feel like it takes a lot of engineering resources and you've got to think about it. And a lot of people don't know about it. But it's really like just that permission, I think, and that logging goes a long way in proving that, hey, you're thinking about this and you take your customers' data seriously, and then you can tell that story. And that's what I think a lot of companies are looking for. Are you even thinking about it?
Yeah, and so trust is repetition over time. That's the only way you build trust. And every time you break that trust, you've got to find ways to fix it. And the more transparent you are, as Christina was saying earlier, sunlight kills mold. It shows a maturity, but also you build the trust back up. Where yes, I never trust, I always verify. How do I verify? I go look. I can look at any time. I don't have to call and ask, because it used to be, let me call, give you 35 days or 40 days notice. We'll set up a time. And in those 40 days, you got your stuff in order, right? You got your house set up better because SAP, Siemens, Deutsche Bank, somebody was coming on site to do their stuff. And then it got to the point where, you were doing your SOC 2s twice a year. Yes, I was crazy enough to do them every 6 months. But that's what you had to do in the HR world selling to Germans. And now it's annual, but between those annuals, and yes, I think the whole concept of the SOC 2 is fantastic because it is over time, it shows consistency, but it is always in review, it's in past. How do you do it where it's Tuesday, I just feel like checking, how do I look? And seeing those trust reports that are coming out, those ability to see at the moment provides that continual trust that builds the piece in there. So on the subject of breaking trust, because the world is imperfect and things break and they always go wrong. Dan, start with you. Has it ever happened? Has something gone horribly wrong and you had to rebuild trust somewhere?
I'm just saying no, knock on wood, knock on wood.
All right.
Yeah, honestly, like just being solid, we've stayed there, like, and we're being consistent. We haven't had anything. And honestly, it's nice. The nice thing about security, there are so many rules that you know what to do. Like, it's like,
I have never heard anybody say the nice thing about security is there's so many rules, but you're absolutely right. You're right. It tells you what to do.
So yeah, we've got that. And like, honestly, Vanta is great. Like Vanta is plugged into everything and I get emails and it tells me, hey, this is out. You've usually got a couple days to remediate or acknowledge it. And nothing is significantly wrong because we've got that solid foundation. So I can just go in and be like, hey, your screen lock you somehow change that setting. I need you to change that back. And then I can see within, the next day, hey, you didn't do that. You need to do that. Okay, I'm going to do that for you. Like, so it's just really
and minor course corrections along the way, minor course corrections now, and that way you don't miss the moon when the audit comes around.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Christina, anything, did you break trust somewhere and have to rebuild it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually say yes. And our customers, some of our customers know about this, maybe not to leave the Zoom, like please don't tweet this part, but late last year, well, when was it? Probably last fall, late summer, fall. So we built Slack integration into Vanta. One part of it is you tell us like what Slack channel to send messages to. So you connect the integration, we call the API, we get a list of channels. We show them to you. You choose which one you want the messages to go to. The pulling the channel list actually kind of takes longer than you want it to from an end user perspective. So we would cache that data. Cool. So it's like you kind of save it before the database, so it's easy to pull up. All makes sense. We pushed a code change, so the cache key was null for everyone. So everyone had the same cache key. So anyway, so it makes sense, but it doesn't. So what would happen is you would log in, you'd look at the settings page, you'd push the get my Slack channels button, basically, and you'd see a list of Slack channels from the last person who pushed the button, who may or may not have been you. Public channels only, but still, not what you want. We realized this actually was a CSM was on a call and was demoing this feature to a customer, and a customer did it and was like, these aren't my channels. And the CSM was like, 1 moment, please. I need to go send a Slack message. It's great CSM. Anyway, figured out what happened. We only had logging data for people who had visited the page, not who visited the page and clicked the button. Anyway, basically what we did was send, well, one, fix the cache key thing. 2, sent an email to everyone who visited that page. And it was from Rob, our security lead, and was like, hello. Someone may have seen your Slack channel, headline, someone may have seen your Slack channel names. Here's what happened. Here's what we're doing. Here's the timeline, with, down to the minute, right? Here's a full incident report. Any questions? Here's my cell phone number. And we sent that to, again, everyone who visited the page. And I think that was the trope, but the true trope of try to take these trust breaking incidents and turn them into trust building incidents. And uniformly got, if anyone was really angry at that email, they didn't tell us. The folks who did reply to that email were like, this is more detail than I would have expected.
Would normally expect, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't expect a minute timeline here. And also, just my Slack channel names, you're cool over there. Which was great, but you kind of send those and you don't know, because again, Vanta is premised on trust, and this was very much breaking it. So that's kind of the thing. And it's actually interesting, even from a recruiting perspective. We've told that story a couple times, because I think there's some certainly when we recruit for the security team, but kind of there's a engineer archetype as well that's well, you say this, but how do you actually do it? Or if you had a security incident, what would you do? And they almost asked that as a culture question. And so just being able to talk through this and be like, oh, let me tell you, I think has also been helpful internally as well, because it's not the hypothetical, what would happen. It's no, we did this. Here's what we did. Here's what happened.
Yeah, it's the fact that you provide, detail to start with, you've got a person, not a generic email address. You've got a cell phone number. You're giving people, if they feel it's urgent to them, and it might be, because this is the thing about data, it's a list of Slack channels, but there could be a list of Slack channels from a particular company that might have something that pertains to them that's super, super important, or highly, maybe they're doing an acquisition or merger. Exactly.
Company.
Or, here's the layoff channel. I don't know. That's a horrible way to do it, but it is what it is. And to have that out there. So you have to assume that to everybody, all data is important, and let them make the decision when it comes back to it. And I think that's amazing, because, I've gone through the same myself. I had a super helpful customer service person manually decrypt a customer's file and put it into the environment, the wrong environment, but they And that was the problem. It was one of those things where we realized that there was this rare occasion where something would fail and you would have to manually go in and upload it. And everything was failing because it was in the wrong directory, and it was failing because it was in the wrong directory, which meant it was calling the wrong decryption key, so our tools were working, but there was a bypass, but there was no oversight to the bypass. So they were tired, it was late, they did it for them. And, I was the one that was sitting in the office the next day at the customer's site, because this was HR data and you don't make a phone call at that point, you show up and take the beating for it. But that's, we went through and showed them how we were going to rebuild this, how all of the things worked, and how it was actually their pressure on that customer support person that encouraged them to break the processes. So yeah, the world is imperfect. Things are always going to fail, absolutely always going to fail. So we always have to find ways to easily deal with it, be transparent, own up to the mistakes. Mistakes are not bad, right? Mistakes are places to find improvement. And I think, that's part of the issue that we have, is that mistakes are glorified today, right? You can do something right 1,000,000 times and you make one mistake and people go, see? And we have to start saying, hey, we made a mistake and here's how we fixed it, right? It's all in how we deal with it. I know we're coming up. I just want to see if anybody out there has any questions. They want to put them into the chat. We've got about 12 minutes left, and I've got some more questions here that I'm going to be bringing up if we're
Feel
not.
free to also just come off mute if it's easier for you.
Yep. All right, let me go before we'll let people mull that and see if they've
If
got
you
any
have a
questions.
question, then you'd rather just ask it, just say, I have a question. And when there's a break, I'll call on you. Thanks.
Yep. So what's the easy, no regret move you would advise any company at any stage to do in this context? Christina.
Follow Rob's advice in the article in the chat, but to or fail the things, inventory the things. I also think, kind of building off of that, and I've referenced this a few times, but I think at first glance, this whole world seems a little like mind-boggling, right? You have these long questionnaires, they're all specific, they're all different. What the heck is a control? How do you think about security? And that is all true. And I think as you get more into it, it gets a little easier to generalize and, make these principles, inventory all the things, make sure they're hard to log into for the people who shouldn't have access to them. Make sure, only the people have access to the right things for their role, right? And those can actually be applied, across a bunch of different domains in a company. And I think if somebody has those in mind, just very tactically, the things like the security questionnaires tend to be easier to answer, because it's not, you have to go through and understand each question, but it's oh, that question is getting at role-based access review. Well, I know the answer to that. Versus have I seen this precise wording before? If that makes sense, right? It's when it's a little too robot, it gets much harder.
Yeah.
And so just maybe encouraging folks. I think actually a lot of this world is also kind of like accounting. It is sort of the equivalent of 4th grade math, but really big words, 10th grade words. And I think actually a lot of security controls is that too. And so maybe it's just don't get turned off by the big words. There's actually some comprehensible, more basic in a good way, principles behind it all.
Common sense underlying it.
Yes.
Yep. Cool. Diane, what would you do? What's your no regret move?
Honestly, I think starting with something like Vanta, really through this conversation, I'm even seeing how much more it's helped us than I realized. So I came in with walked in, here's Vanta. And I've just learned so much. Security is not my main job or my priority. I'm an operator. I gotta make sure the business runs, we're selling, but security is a part of that. So for me, what it is it's that here I've got my guides, I can set it and forget it almost. I mean, I'm monitoring it, but it's really a low lift. And then also what we've done is we've brought in a virtual security officer. So for me, that's the other big piece as a startup. Hey, I'm as an operator, I can follow these rules. Like Christina was saying, it's not that complicated, but I've got this partner who really knows their stuff. And this is why I feel familiar. I've gotten the spirit of the questions and gone through questionnaires because I just sat with the virtual security officer. We went through, I asked questions. What does that mean? like I can answer most of a security questionnaire by myself now, just because we've talked about it, but I have the confidence in our business and what we're sharing with customers because I do have that dedicated resource. And then the third thing that was really interesting is like with Vanta and our auditors, realizing that the auditors are there to help you. So asking questions like, hey, will this satisfy that control? Because like, especially your first time going through security, it's just so basically building that network of how do I have checks and balances where this isn't going to take up my day? Because the reality is, as a Series A startup, you do not have the bandwidth, the time, or the priority to have a full-time dedicated security person, but it helps so much in that, 0 to 1, getting customers, making sales. So it's important.
And just to come in here, Diane was not paid by Christina to say that. Actually went out. These are 2 craft portfolio companies. So these are this is authentic feedback here from Diane.
Yeah, and as a security person, I so agree that I think I've always said that if I can make my job title disappear as a CISO, that the company shouldn't need a CISO. It shouldn't need somebody who's security specific. They need people that are business or vertical specific, so engineering specific or HR specific, and are applying the new world order of security to what we do as digital people. But that gets really esoteric, I think, when I start talking about it and people freak out. So keep looking for CISOs if you need them. But I think virtual CISOs are a great idea, and that's exactly why I'm here. So if you ever need to understand how to interpret a customer's questionnaire or a legal contract as it pertains to data privacy, that's what I do, and I did for a long time. So as we're wrapping it up, then let's just go for a fun one here. What's the most outrageous thing you've had a customer ask for, Diane?
Yeah.
Have you had any of those? Like, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of what happened to me. This one almost ended my career, actually, because I was at SAP. This was after SAP acquired SuccessFactors, and we had a very specific way of doing audits, right? It was, we have our audit, and you can audit anything that's not in our audit. That was sort of the way we worked it, right? So that way, if I did a 300-page audit, I'm not auditing twice. There's no point. And I got a phone call from Bosch, and Bosch said, we're going to come in and audit. And I was like, okay, well, when? And they said, when? And they said, here's how we're going to do it. And they sent me this list of, here's all the scripts we're going to run. Here's the access to servers we need, and et cetera, et cetera. So I called them back and said, no, you don't get to do that. We're a multi-tenant environment. No. And I thought that was the end of it until a divisional president called me and said, did you just tell Bosch no? And I said, yes. They said, why? I said, well, because multi-tenant environment, if I let them touch one of those machines, run one of those scripts, I have violated the data privacy laws for everybody else. And he went, oh, okay. Well, let me explain something. We just signed a $150 million a year contract with Bosch on the software and support side, not on the SaaS side. And I went, oh, well, if I had known that, we could have probably answered it slightly differently. And he said, well, what would it take for Bosch to be allowed to do this? And I said, about $6 million, because they have to literally build them their own environment. He goes, I'll call you back in an hour. An hour later, I had $6 million. I built an entire dedicated environment. Like, I mean, it was the most outrageous thing you'd ever seen. But understanding the context of the business, it made total sense. A $6 million environment was nothing against $150 million recurring software revenue, and they were signing for multi-years. So have you had anything crazy?
Not that crazy. I was going to say they've asked us to agree to audits, and like for all of our, I want to say like everything in the kitchen sink. They're like, I want to see everything. And for me, that's just ridiculous. I am not going to give you access to everything that our company has done. Kind of for that same point, we're not in that point where somebody can pay $6 million. So nothing on you.
Christina, which I think you must have had some crazy ones, only because you're the audit. They want to audit the auditors, and somebody's got to think that's fun.
We do get that. What else? Somewhat known, but prior to Vanta and like the kind of product development research phase, did a lot of like manual audit readiness work and answered security questionnaires for free for some companies, which is very helpful from a product development perspective, not the most fun. And there was an education company startup we were working with that sold to school districts, and their questionnaires were just wild. because they were like entirely stuck in the early 90s, right? And the questions like, do you have the fire department's phone number on file? And the company would say no, and then they, you know, the like district would come back and be like, you like, I was going down my flow chart and you have, you know, now you're in a bad place. Can you please say yes to the question? Right, and it's because the district was, you know, I don't know, procuring something from the who had paper records, and you didn't want the records to, you know, burn in a fire, so you need the fire department phone number. But this question came up in 2017 to an API software company. And, you know, again, it just wasn't enough to say no. You had to get on the phone and be like, it's 2017 and we're an API software company. And, you know, those conversations where you're like, everyone is smart here, but like, what are we doing?
Yeah, no, those, yeah, you gotta love those. I've seen people inspecting the inspection dates on fire extinguishers when I did data center tours at colo facilities. It's like, dude, this is 2010. Like, you're looking at the fire extinguisher date. Okay. I'm not sure where that goes. Sarah, sorry.
Kind of related to that, I would just mention is, I mean, this is maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but the AWS SOC 2 is kind of fun to read because you read about all the crazy physical security controls they have in their data centers, right? And it's like hedges and dogs and retina scanners, and you know, it's like all this stuff.
No direct driveway to the front door. I always love that.
So like AWS kind of does, like they have the fire department on, you know, speed dial or something, so we don't have to.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, those ones are interesting. You know, and truthfully, I think if you're building off an AWS, a GCP, an Azure, whatever, if you're building off any cloud-based solution, read their SOC 2s, have somebody review it once a year, and in Jira, cut a ticket that says, I pulled it down, I read it, and I noted anything of difference, and then close that ticket when you're done. Because when your auditors come in, they will not touch AWS's SOC 2. They're not going to look at it because they will not opine on the physical security, but they can opine on the fact that you have reviewed the security for any known vulnerabilities, issues, missing bits. And at least that gives, again, that I'm taking care of my own house. I have looked at my providers. I know what my providers are doing, and I'm being aware of it.
Awesome. So no more questions, but thank you very much to Rob and Shelby for the high five. And I will go ahead, if you RSVP'd, I will go ahead and send out the recording to you. If you did not RSVP and still want the recording, just email me, sarah@craftventures.com. And thank you, Christina and Diane, and for Bill. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I think I've learned a lot, which is great.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.